So over the weekend, UFC Singapore took place. Ben Askren falling to 1-2, being submitted by Demian Maia. Now, I did my whole morning combat on this, Brian, but the question is here. We're about a year or so past the initial trade between ONE Championship and UFC. They traded Demetrious Johnson to ONE, and allegedly, or whatever you want to call it, and then they put Ben Askren in UFC. There's a question about whether now, who won the trade? And I'll say this, Brian. I mean, look, people, if you... Okay, so do you have a football team?
The Atlanta Falcons.
Really?
But I'm not hardcore anymore. I was back in like the Hammer days, you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Jerry Glanville buying a seat for Elvis.
When Neon Dion was playing?
Exactly.
All right, fair enough.
When Left Eye was burning people's houses down, I mean, you know.
Who wasn't a fan in those days? But I'm a Skins fan in Washington, D.C. You got Trent Williams, maybe the best left tackle in football, and the dumbest man on the planet, GM Bruce Allen, doesn't want to trade him. But if he did trade him, he'd get him for like what, maybe a first, second round pick and someone. In other words, there'd be commensurate value, or at least perceived commensurate value. And people are looking at this trade and they're saying, well, you got a world-class talent, a proven world-class talent in Demetrious Johnson versus somebody who is now struggling at the world-class level to a degree, right? The two losses were not that great. One is a little bit flukish in the sense that it was only 5 seconds, but the win was also controversial that he got. And they're saying these are not equivalent things. And that part is probably true at this point, although I don't think Ben's career is over. There's still some to be learned there. But let's assume that they're not commensurate values. Let's assume there's actually quite a disparity between them. That, to me, is not the way to evaluate this trade. Look, Demetrious Johnson is happy at ONE. He's being well paid at ONE. He wanted out of the UFC. He got a bunch of value. ONE got a lot of value in having somebody that good on their roster. UFC is a much better fit for Ben Askren than ONE was. His trash talk, his bravado. And there was this big speculative question. This guy had spent the majority of his career on the sidelines. You got to at least see this question being at least attempted to be answered. So, and you could also say that the Jorge Masvidal popularity boom
doesn't happen without Ben.
Doesn't happen without Ben Askren. So the thing is, are they equivalent trades in the sense of goods for goods? Not necessarily. But was it, like, number one, is it good to get these guys out of their indentured servitude contracts? Yes. And moreover, fans, what do you want? You got a chance to see an experiment. Maybe it's not going to pan out in favor of the way you thought it might, but I'd rather see the attempt than not the attempt.
I mean, one championship until they make this the full U.S. expansion and kind of go for it. They're a classy boutique. DJ fits that mold perfectly. But if you want to know who won the trade, UFC has won, is still winning, and will continue to win the trade because those three Ben Askren fights up to this point, Luke, have gotten more interest and attention, unfortunately, than most recent Demetrious Johnson title defenses, which were largely happening on UFC fight nights for a trend, for a stretch, for a while, for a reason. UFC won this trade because when they look at these goods, they're not necessarily thinking or caring so much about, well, DJ may end up being our greatest flyweight, one of our greatest fighters. It's about commodity in the moment, and Ben Askren was a better commodity and actually still is with these losses in getting Masvidal over and bringing attention and bringing fun fights. I think the bigger question here is anytime you have somebody in Ben Askren's spot, which was so dominant in anywhere but the UFC, and you start making the same type of debates that we'll probably have in a minute about Douglas Lima, you know, how do you compare what he's doing to what's going on in the UFC? Where would you rank him? And there were times that we would say, look, Ben Askren's looking so great, not taking a loss, taking punishment and coming back and just controlling people with this one skill that, man, what would it look like if he fought GSP and all this stuff? And I think sometimes people get solved when they come to the UFC, right? Sometimes people have an Eddie Alvarez type run where they surprise you. This was one of those where I think, unless Ben Askren can come back with a run and really prove something if he feels like he has to and needs to, this wasn't, well, it was a win and a victory from a brand standpoint, from the idea of this man being a world-ranked, legitimate guy in the top 2 or 3, not top 10, but we're talking about at those times when he's blowing people out in Bellator 1, we're like, what would it look like against a UFC champion? I think those were wishful.
There were clearly some, there's clearly some over-speculation going on. And this has been a bit of a market correction. I think that's fair to say. One, I don't know what Ben's next step is, but if he continues to pursue a career in UFC and is allowed to continue one, I don't think it's inconceivable. A run, I don't know. But put some nice wins together, I'm not ready to throw in the towel on that particular part yet, although that could be wrong too. I don't know. I'm speculating. But I made this point on Morning Combat Dissected, Brian Campbell, which was, people are like, oh, he's 35, but Demian Maia's 41, now 42, I think, in a week or so. This idea that like age is the excuse is not really fair. First of all, at 42, doing what Maia's doing is just insane, number one. Number two, it's not an apples to apples comparison. Dude, if you are on a path like he was in Bellator when he was beating Koreshkov and Amasu and Douglas Lima, and by the way...
Young Koreshkov and young Lima, though, to be honest. Very
young Ben Askren. The Douglas Lima story, which we'll get to in just a point, is a question about longitudinal perseverance and having to be part of a process that pushes you in that direction. He was never really pushed. He went over to one because he couldn't get a shot in the UFC in his athletic prime. He fought a bunch of people he had no real reason to push himself against. Then he retired. Folks forget this. He was done fighting and then came back. Here's my point. If you had stayed in the UFC, or excuse me, if Askren had a chance to go from, let's say, Bellator right to UFC, maybe he would have washed out fast. I don't know. It's a possibility. Or maybe he would have had some wins, maybe he would have had some losses, but he would have been part of a developmental process that would have either washed him out or potentially pushed him to greatness. It's like another fighter, if they're good, but then they don't ever get that push, then they get to 35, you can't make up for lost time in that particular way. So when people say, oh, well, it's not an excuse, Ben Askren's super overrated, again, maybe there is a bit of a market correction happening, but I don't think
the thing is, you're never going to know, though.
It's not fair to somebody who was not part of the real cauldron of the UFC process to say now at 35, oh, they're super overrated.
So you're calling him Arvydas Sabonis. That's what you're doing right now.
What I'm saying is if he had been a part of that process during his athletic prime, it could be a very different answer.
But when you're trying to do that in your head and you're trying to mythically say what would it look like if he came over, I think we gave so much credit to his one skill. And then you get a guy obviously world-class and great like Maia who had put a very strong performance. In many ways seemed to cancel out whatever Ben could do. And then you basically saw two teachers in the break room fighting over a cup of coffee trying to throw punches at each other. It was maybe not the classiest fight.
I don't even understand that analogy.
The striking.
What high school did you go to?
I went to a tough one, by the way. Naugatuck High, thank you. The great
what high school did you go to, bro?
But the striking in this fight was.
Yeah, it was not awesome. It was not the best. I just think, look, man. It's how do I explain it? It's certain portions of your life to get the most out of yourself. What if he had gone to the UFC at age 28, let's say, and gotten a loss? And he would have thought to himself, Jesus, I really need to go and work on some
What if he never
things.
sent that tweet at Dana? Really?
Right.
Going,
well,
right?
all these things. But he had then gone to the UFC, got the loss. What if that had retooled him, changed things, got him to a point where now he could push forward and maximize his strengths? Dude, if you're never forced to maximize your strengths and then you're called upon it years afterwards, what are you realistically going to get out of that?
I find it weird that you're building this foundation of excuses. We're just basically saying,
foundation of excuses.
Like he's got. If he wants to hang on and keep fighting, he's got to prove.
All of a sudden, development doesn't matter now.
It does, but the whole point was, even though I feel like the UFC won the trade, hot take or not, hipster take, whatever. Yeah, I think they won the trade, marketing purposes. But he still hasn't really shown us anything in the UFC outside of being able to take a beating against Robbie and persevere, which, again, I'm going to give him credit for. But if he wants to keep fighting, he's still got a lot to prove that
Agreed.
He's top 5 UFC level with that one great skill.
I just think, last thing on this, I just think the idea that you can look at him now and say, yes, was there a certain estimation of his abilities coming over that was overstated? Pretty clearly. On the other hand, looking at him now and saying, this is all he ever could have been, this is all that ever was, when he was denied the opportunity to maximize his ability, is just not fair. It's simple. It's simplistic.
But back then, he would have been going up in there against Prime GSP.
Fine. Then maybe he would have lost and washed out and wouldn't have this curiosity. The curiosity is born of the fact that he was denied the opportunity. That's my point. And in that speculation, yeah, you're going to get some wild-ass theories.
I just don't normally see you go that direction. We're hard and fast. We don't protect anyone.
I just think it's really unfair. Athletes think you're just born good. Dude, you get better. Douglas Lima, when he started in Bellator versus now, look at the difference. And it's not, yes, a lot of that is just Douglas Lima being awesome. A lot of that is him losing to Rory McDonald. A lot of that is him losing to Ben Askren and then force himself to going back and getting better and getting better and getting better and getting better. No one ever forced that on Ben Askren. He was rolling through everybody.
I'm just saying, in this show, we cut to the chase. There's no friendships, right? I'll go downstairs, little brown hairs everywhere.
Bro,
you're nasty, B. I don't care. You know what I'm saying? I'll bring it around here.
I'm not trying to protect anything. I don't have any interviews lined up with Ben. I've not even reached out to him. I just think it's unfair. I just don't think it's fair. Not totally fair. I'll say it's halfway fair.
I don't know what happened to you in South America, but it's, must be a very, very...
I've got a heart, Brian Campbell.
Wow.
I got a heart.
Took a long time, Grinch. Great to see you back. All right.